Welcome to Slight Reliability, the show where we learn SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm Stephen Townshend. Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townshend, and this is the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. Today I'm here with Andy Thurai, VP and Principal Analyst with Constellation Research, an analyst firm. He researches, talks about, and produces reports on a number of SRE-related topics, such as observability, AI, machine learning, and incident management, which is our topic for today. He's just released his latest report titled The 2023 Trends in Incident Management. And he's here today to chat with us about what's in the report. So firstly, hello, Andy. Welcome to the show. How are you going?
Hey, good, man. And I'm glad to be finally on the show. We have been talking about it for a while.
A long while, yeah. I thought I'd give you a chance to sort of tell us who you are and how you got to where you are.
Yeah. No, I've been in the enterprise space for 25 plus years and, used to be with the big naming companies like IBM's, BMC's, Oracle's of the world on the enterprise side of things. And then a couple of years ago, I wanted to try out the analyst side of things. So I switched the roles, wearing a different hat, crossed over to the dark side, as you would call it. And so we are a small analyst firm called Constellation Research. We do research reports, thought leadership work, and advisory to companies on a product and go-to-market strategies. That's what I do day in and day out.
This report that you produced, where did the data come from?
So this is actually a follow-up. So I did a report, 2021, initial report called Trends in Incident Management. And then when I was going to refresh that, and we were going to run a survey of this, and then there were a couple of companies, enterprise companies in the space came to us and said, hey, we'd be interested in polling our customers and find out the results too. So this is in collaboration with our own users, as well as two large name companies in the space that we sent out a survey to about 1,000, maybe 1,500 people, and we got about 250 responses. That's not bad.
So moving into the report, getting into the juicy stuff, the first thing I noticed was around status pages. One of the recommendations was that for providers to provide an external facing page so that customers are aware of any issues. So according to some research by Metris that Jeff and Ryan, who came on the show earlier, mentioned, on average, there's a 26-minute gap between an incident occurring until it's on a status page. I was curious, do you think that's acceptable?
Before I answer that, let me ask you, do you think that's acceptable?
I don't think so. No, it would be better if it was faster. It also depends on context, right? If you're AWS, for example, and everyone depends on you, I think it should be, a minute or two, if you can.
Yeah, no, you answered it yourself. So in my view, it's not acceptable. 26 minutes is a long time. So that tells me one or two things. Either one, if you know what the hell you're doing, you're not transparent with the customers, which is not good. And if you are transparent, but it really is taking you 26 minutes, that means you have a bigger problem because you don't know what the hell you're doing. So if it's taking about 25, 26, 30, whatever the time it's taking for you to figure out that your service is down, no, I don't want you to be using your service. That's a dangerous thing, right? And again, vendors and service providers are notoriously not good in updating it, obviously, because they don't want you to see how often it's down. So, that's why actually when I do this recommendation to the customers, when I do consulting advisory opportunities with them, what I tell them is that, okay, so that's one piece. You can depend on, service providers' status page, but also you got to do your own monitoring and measurement. I'm not talking about just pinging the applications. That doesn't mean anything. If you have a high value applications or high value paths, you got to do more of the synthetic user journey monitoring of your users. That's very important, right? Yeah. You can't just trust the vendors. You have to do your own checking to see that, the services and the path your customers are taking, especially the high value paths, order placement or what have you. You got to make sure that it's up and running all the time, not just up and running in one location, but from diversified locations all over the world. Yeah.
I think it comes down to the question, can the customers achieve the outcome that we want them to be able to achieve, or like the service we're providing? And you need to constantly verify that or validate that. And if you can't just rely on your providers to provide a great status page. Because the general feeling I get from the industry is that status pages are necessary, but no one really trusts them. they're not seen as a reliable source of information.
Of course.
So, yeah.
Well, that's the reason I recommend my customers. They're like, oh, we have a status page, we can find out. Well, first of all, there are two things in here. Not many people know that a lot of vendors have two different status pages. One is external facing, one is internal facing. So you don't know what goes on the internal facing one, right? So you see what they want you to see, which, so maybe a good thing, maybe not. But, yes, have that as a baseline, but build something that's better for you. It all depends on, again, how valuable your application is. Can you afford your application to be down for a certain time? One. And two, okay, so if a provider goes down, if your application goes down, what's your backup plan? I mean, if you have to depend on the provider until that whatever comes back up, then it doesn't matter if the status update is done in 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 5 hours, because you have to rely on them. But if you do have a failover or backup options available, then the sooner you find out, whether with their help or by yourself, you can switch over.
One of the other questions was around what companies are trying to achieve with their incident management. And the findings were that 48% of organizations want to reduce their MTTI, or mean time to acknowledgement of an incident. 37% want to reduce MTTR. 30% want to reduce event and alert noise. Why do you think mean time to acknowledgement was valued higher than mean time to recovery or remediate? What is it about acknowledging an incident which seems so important to organizations?
Well, so going back to the same status page conversation we just had, if I know that my service provider, my vendor, knows that my system is down as soon as or before I find out, it gives me some confidence whether or not they're resolving it. And also, remember, MTTR, that's an average measure. Doesn't mean that, they all get solved within the time. And the average itself could be anywhere between 5 to 10 hours, depending on the complexity of the system, right? So if an incident takes about 10 to 15 hours to resolve, yes, by reducing it to 14 and a half, yes, it does look good. But if I don't provide the users, yes, I acknowledge the system is down. Yes, I'm working on it. Yes, these are the status updates. Yes, these are the things we have done. And yes, this is the problem. That actually instills a little bit confidence with the customer. Okay, looks like they know what they're doing. So maybe I'll wait it out to see what is happening, even though you don't really have a recourse saying that, okay, if you are using a SaaS service, yeah, knowing makes you a little bit comfortable, but that doesn't mean anything. But I've seen that, companies seem to appreciate the fact that the customer has acknowledged that, there's an incident, major incident, we are working towards it. And actually, some of the companies which has best processes in place, not only they do a status page for external usage, but for their key customers, they also send out messages, whether it's a Slack or community page messages or even email form or a combination thereof as soon as it goes down. So if I didn't know my system is down, if I get a notification from a vendor saying that, hey, this system is down, that I'm fixing on it, we got you taken care of, that gives me more confidence. But on the flip side of it, if I get too many of those emails and notifications from the customer, I may not think highly of them. So it's a double-edged sword.
It makes me think of, say, 6-7 years ago when I used to travel into the city on the train 5 days a week. Sometimes the train would just stop in the middle of the tracks and there would be no announcement about what's going on. And it used to really annoy me. But if it stopped and someone went over the announcement and said, we've stopped and we're just waiting for a train to pass, I'd be like, it's fine. So right. I can understand the MTTA being important. Right. It sort of makes sense in that.
Well, I mean, the transparency is really key, especially if you're in a competitive business that, if there's a user breathing down, another provider breathing down your neck, you got to be up and running all the time. And then you got also tell your customers, the status of your systems on a regular basis.
Speaking of MTT things, mean time to innocence is a concept that you mentioned in the report. Could you explain, just for the audience, what is mean time to innocence? Okay,
so very commonly what I've seen is that when, especially for the we'll talk about in a little bit about, what are the best practices of, identifying incident and how to go about it. But generally when a major incident happens, it's almost all hands on deck situation, right? We are talking about a major incident, not a minor ones. And assuming that organization knows how to differentiate between major and minor incidents, that itself is a big if. And then what they do is that to the war room, whether it's a virtual war room or a physical war room, they invite anybody and everybody they can think about. They're like, okay, we'll invite like 200 people. That's not very uncommon in a big company. So when you have 200 people in the collaboration room, everybody wants to add value to it. There are too many cooks. There is a thing called too many cooks in a situation. They mess the whole thing up saying that, hey, you should be looking at that, looking at this. It becomes very confusing. Plus, if it takes 10 or 11 hours to resolve the incident, the productivity time of those 200 key dev engineers are lost. Mm-hmm. So what companies have established, at least the ones that do best practices from what I've seen, is that, okay, we'll invite everybody, boil the ocean when there's all hands on deck situation. But if you can prove to us that you didn't have a release for whatever time frame, 2-3 days now, which is a long time, of course, in the agile dev situation, and your service hasn't cost that, and even if it cost that, whatever, and then you could prove that using the traces and paths and logs and what combination, you got nothing to do with this, you can leave by establishing that metric. And then, so it boils down to less number of people I can continue my work. But again, if you leave, you better have a substantiating evidence to prove that it's got nothing to do with you. You know?
Yeah, I think, my devil's advocate there would be in a pathological culture where there's low trust and teams are competing with each other. I think that would lead to teams saying anything to get the spotlight off them because they don't want to be blamed. And I've seen this kind of culture before. So I think in that context, just because a team says that the problem isn't in their component, it very well could be. So it requires a certain level of culture and trust to make that work.
Yeah, and also the additional fact to that would be if you're trying to promote a blameless culture and leading to a blameless postmortem, regardless of what happened, it's not your fault, it's our fault as a company. If that's what you're trying to do, establishing an MTTI could backfire, saying that, okay, it's not my fault, it's whoever is in the room, it's their fault. So there's a balance you got to do to establish that. And the other thing is that I've seen commonly, instead of inviting everybody and boil the ocean down, you assign specific team leads, kind of for this app, these are the 2 team leads, whatever, what have you. And then them coming in, probably those are mature people, I'm assuming. They're coming in saying, okay, you know what, that's not my team generally responsible. Let's, deep down in this particular team and do what have you. So that's another way I've seen. But in order to do all of that, we are making an assumption. The service cataloging is properly defined. Service ownership is properly identified. And the on-con rotation of the people who are available knows what they're doing and all of the stuff. It's tricky, yes. But what's the alternative? Have 300 people sitting around doing nothing, blaming everybody else?
Well, in observability utopia, when in theory, if you had really great enterprise-wide observability where you got distributed tracing and you can see everything that's going on, it should be clear to everyone like where the incident is. But have I ever seen that utopia? No. But I'm saying in theory, you might not need to worry about so much if it's that visible. Yeah.
Hey, as a famous baseball player Yogi Berra in US says, in theory and practice is same. But in practice, theory and practice is different. So no way, we're nowhere close to it. So it's going to take a while.
Okay, so this is like we might have a little fight over this, but there's a thing in the report that says using systems that track changes closely and employ artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, ML, can result in highly efficient root cause detection. So my initial response is like, really? Like, is there data to back that up? Because I'm super highly suspicious of anything to do with AI or machine learning claiming to provide great value in what I call like real world organizations, messy enterprises and government organizations. I've only really seen AI and ML work in really scoped context, very small scope context, where there's AI or ML sort of programmers, experts involved, and directly involved in the work. So is it real? Is it really helping real organizations?
So let me guess. You don't buy into the ChatGPT hype, huh?
I haven't. No, I haven't even used it at the moment.
I'm just kidding. Well, look, it also. I actually did a posting on LinkedIn just today, talking about how every briefing that I get nowadays seem to be either they are AI infused, ChatGPT integrated, or LLM enabled. Those are the very key terms. Guaranteed one of the three will be there, or some variation of that, right? So and I call them out when I can't tolerate at a certain level. So yes, it has come to that level of people doing the stuff of marketing types. But honestly, all jokes aside, there is a lot of value in AI and ML if you do things right? For example, let's take simple example of alert noise reduction. I mean, nowadays the observability, everybody's going for it, but it's not properly implemented. So which means you have multiple tools measuring the entire stack. For a same incident, it's not uncommon to get thousands of alerts, right? So for one incident, we're talking about thousands. I've seen even extreme situations, tens of thousands alerts come in. So if you have to assign all of them, create service ticket for all of those noises, what do you think is going to happen? Forget about even the resolution, but the time support can enable that. So the alert noise reduction, combining them all into single or groups of tickets as much as possible at a higher level, that's done easily using machine learning. I'm a big proponent of that. That's one of the AIOps use cases that I discussed in not this particular report, but there's another report that I wrote that I discussed that there, right? So that's one.
Okay, you sound convincing. Okay.
That's one.
Okay.
And then root cause analysis, right? If there's a way you can correlate, for example, there was a change went in, let's say 307, and then 307, 30 seconds or 308, that multiple systems started breaking down. Guess what? There is a strong possibility that if you are able to do proper change management and release controls, there is a strong possibility this might have caused it. And I've seen in real life that people are able to resolve the incident. That they also do. There are companies that will do risk analysis, risk assessment of the code, and how risky this can be when you go into production. The risk analysis itself could be one AI component of it. I've seen a lot of companies do it, not successfully, but I've seen them do it. But then by tracking those changes that's going into effect, that you may be able to identify root cause sooner than you think, all right? And also the other thing could also be, depending on which alert came first, you'd be able to track it down to say, okay, you know what? I have 1,000, but this may be the real root cause because this one of the first alerts I received versus this one, which I received about 20 seconds or 20 minutes later, right? So that's another area of a use case that I can see. And third one, whether you agree or not, I've seen, not very successfully, but at least it's fairly successful, based on the trending of certain things, the prediction of either capacity or load, or even a possibility of an incident that's going to happen. The simplest example would be your CPU overload or memory overload or network exhaustion or whatever, right? But there are other service exhaustion, or we can sit here and talk all day, but there are possibilities of predicting an incident. It's not very accurate based on today's systems, but it's pretty darn good. Some of those things I've seen. So that's another area I've seen. You want more? I can give you one more. It could also do the machine learning AI-based approaches can do an incident intelligence routing. If you have the service catalog, service ownership, incident ownerships defined properly, it could not only do that, it could also try to do some auto remediation. It could potentially go and look in the knowledge base if it is properly implemented. This incident, when it happened in the past, this is what we did to resolve it. Try to automate it. Say what happens. If it doesn't, we can resolve it anyways, but at least give it a shot. You don't buy into any of that?
I think I need some more convincing. I need to see it in the real world. I guess I need to see it with my own eyes. And I think it also makes you think about what is AI and ML versus just, well-programmed algorithms. At what point does it become AI?
Well, anything algorithmic based is AI, isn't it? Unless you want to call the rules based as AI, which a lot of companies do nowadays. You write a rule and then you say, oh, that's mine is AI based. So you write a rule, so you call yourself AI based, All right.
Okay.
So we gotta maybe do another podcast just debating this out. So okay, we'll table that for now.
Okay. Incident commanders. So this was one of the recommendations, that incident commanders are assigned as soon as major incidents are acknowledged. So how do you decide who's going to be the incident commander for any given major incident?
Yeah, so depending on the size of the organization, again, I've seen large organizations have incident commanders whose job is just to do that. There are enough incidents. Oh, yeah, there are enough incidents that, their job has become a full-time job. And the first thing they look for is, somebody who's able to do prioritization well. That's one. And very good communicators. And then potentially good problem solvers too. But more importantly, as one CXO put it, I look for people who are like, do you ever watch that Kung Fu Panda movie? You remember the turtle in there?
Yeah.
So a turtle in there called Uguay. I basically look for Uguays. Even if the whole data center is burning, they'll be calm and quiet, try to figure out how to solve this issue. That's basically what you need in an incident commander, right? In a small to mid organizations, I've seen people on a rotational basis, on calls, saying that, okay, if something comes in, they would be assigned. Because, you in my mind, that's actually the most critical element of the incident. The first thing is you need to identify, acknowledge incident. Then somebody has to take ownership. You can call whatever you want. You don't have to call us the incident commander, but somebody has to take ownership of it right away. Yeah. As soon as it's acknowledged.
I agree. It sounds like a really important role. It also sounds like an extremely stressful role. And I can't think of anyone who would willingly want to go, yeah, I'll do it.
Well, there is always somebody willing to take a risk when you pay enough money, right? So
in terms of challenges for incident management, I don't know whether there's much to talk about here, because there are almost an even split between these following factors: reducing unplanned downtime, preventing incidents before they happen, reducing alert noise, reducing root cause analysis time, routing alerts to the right people at the right time, automating schedule, improving postmortems and knowledge bases, and automating incident resolution or remediation. So when I read that, I just think basically everything in incident management is a challenge.
Well, yeah, yes, because keep in mind, most of this organization, this is one of the major issues they have. When they are planning for contingency, emergency, and incident responses, they're planning for the known knowns, all right, maybe to an extent, unknown knowns. But a true incident management system, in my view, should be able to do the unknown unknowns, as they call it. All right.
Yes.
You don't know if it is going to happen. You don't even know what's going to happen, but it happened. But you got to have a plan in place because this has never happened before. You don't know how to solve it. What's going on? That's the, as I say, it hits the fan moment, right? When that happens, you should be able to take ownership of it, figure out a way. There are multiple instances come to mind of the vendors who screwed up royally. I don't want to name them, but they all did a pretty bad job. Later analysis, when you talk with them, when I ask them, what did you do in this situation? They did everything opposite of what they're supposed to do. So the whole idea for incident management, in my view, is to be prepared for that unknown unknowns and do the best practices. Obviously you have an incident commander, you identify when the incident happens, acknowledge it, assign somebody in, find out who the service owner is, figure out, there are steps that you need to take rather than just, blindly, throwing a dot in the dark and see if it, sticks. So if you have the procedures in place, at least, you're systematic about, how to resolve that. So yes, because incident management is such a new category, a lot of people are struggling. And especially the fact that they're also moving into cloud newly. The cloud native tools also is not, some of them are not up to par. They're trying to, band-aid between what they have in hybrid and cloud. That's another solution. And then also you got to have I wrote a different report on that as well, incident management or market overview report, in which I compare some of the incident management vendors and, what they do specifically. There are some vendors, some of the new vendors, some of the old vendors, I compared them as well.
And even just when you first move to the cloud, not understanding necessarily the technology as well is going to lead maybe to more incidents because of unexpected things, just simply because of misunderstanding. Another thing you mentioned in the report is that service providers, it talks about service providers and SLAs. So there is this theory where you pay for a service and you cite there's an SLA will provide this much availability, for example, and there's penalties built in. So we were talking about this the other day. So are these penalties actually being enforced?
Good question. It can be enforced as long as you have a backup mechanism. If they say, you know what, we're done, we don't want you as a customer, what is your backup option? Keep that in mind, right? So, well, I mean, if you push it too hard, it's going to break sometime or other, right? I mean, some of the big vendors, providers, you don't have much choice. You use as what is the choice? But what I've seen the clever organizations do, obviously, there's two different metrics that you measure when it comes to SLAs and agreements and SLOs and all of that, right? There are KPIs, key performance indicators, and there are CPIs, right? The CPIs actually would have SLA service level credits associated with that. So if you're just measuring KPIs, you measure against that and how you fix it. But if you measure against the CPIs, a lot of organizations, particularly when you outsource your incident management and maintenance mode of that to the outsourced service providers, then they have that assigned to it. And if it is outsourced, somebody who's maintaining and managing that, that's use an opportunity for you to negotiate. We wanted you to do this and this and this, but you didn't do it. You had this many incidents, ran this long, so we need to negotiate the contract, or we need to have some charge back against that. So that's one way I've seen companies doing that, against the outsourced incident management, maintenance systems managers, the providers, right? Outsourcing of your services. The other way, against the vendors, I've seen companies use that tactically when it comes up for negotiation for the next time in the contract, saying that, hey, you said your system will be up for 5 nines, but your system was not up for 5 nines. We had this many outages. That, in effect, landed up affecting some of my services. So because I had so much losses, it's only fair that I got to pass some of that to you. So we need to either reduce the contract or have some charge back from my previous, or you got to reduce the future contract. You have to give me some credits. It's a hit or a miss. It depends on how good your procurement team is. I've seen companies successfully negotiating that, get some discounts back. I don't want to name names, but I've seen somebody actually showed me. They got a 20% discount with the service provider. I was like, wow.
I wonder how many customers of service providers actually validate whether the SLAs are being met, or they just say, we'll just trust the provider to tell us if they break their own SLA, which is never going to happen, is it? So
so that's the thing, right? If a vendor comes and say that my system is up by 9 times, what are they saying that it's up for 9? It's basically you're talking about a ping or what have you, right?
Exactly.
Almost all of the providers are up for 9, and they can prove. But that doesn't mean that your system, your portion was working. That's why all the synthetic monitoring and other things we talked about, or even RUM for that matter, will be very useful, right?
Exactly. You could monitor it yourself, and you could prove without a doubt your availability is 97%. But they could say, but our definition of availability is different than yours. And what are you going to say?
Well, if it's not in the contract, there's not much you can say, because the vendor side contracts, most times it's online, you go there, they have a checkbox to check, and then you accept the terms, and that's it. It's not even negotiable. But if you're a large company providing a ton of services with somebody, and you're talking about tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars you're paying to a provider, then you have to put all these things in place. It may be hard to negotiate, but yes, you do have to consider that, saying that, hey, you know what, I want to put these things in place. You're saying up by 9 times, which is fine. I'm not talking about your website up by 5 nines or backend systems up by 5 9, but my system that I'm using, my specific services, my APIs that I'm using, got to be up at least by whatever percent. But you also have to be reasonable. You cannot go and tell them that, I want a 5 9 uptime for those things. Not going to happen. You should be ready to negotiate. Okay, you know what? If it is up 90% of the time, 95% of the time, or even, for a specific hours you could define, during the working hours, it has to be up by whatever. So they could do for regular maintenance and whatnot. So, and then you could say, if it is not, then you got to write something, you got to write CPI saying that, contractual adjustment clause. So that's the way I would do it.
Yeah.
But yes, you do have to consider that, saying that,
There is so much more to talk about, but unfortunately we are running out of time. I wonder maybe if you might have to come back and we have to have a part two of this where we talk about the rest of the points.
I would love to.
Yeah.
I would love to. Absolutely.
But before we close off, is there any sort of advice or things you wanted to mention before we finish today?
Sure. I mean, I advise a lot of these companies look at their, what they have in place for incident management, and then I make recommendations saying that, what you need to do. Here are the few bullet points that, I noted down, that constantly I recommend to people. One, take ownership of the incident. Okay, as soon as it happens. We talked about all of that through the podcast, right? Or even read my report. Communicate well and in full. Be transparent about it. And customers seem to like that, even if you screw it up, right? So that's one, we got to do it. Really important. The second recommendation is you have to clearly define the metrics in which you have to act. Your SRE teams, your support teams, your engineering teams, all of that. Is it acknowledgement necessary? Resolution necessary? Having it up on necessary? Have a quick band-aid immediately and tech debt later on is solving tech debt is necessary? You got to define all the metrics. So everybody knows what metrics they're working against. And one thing, final closeout thing, I say this to people, they look at me like a two-headed monster. I tell them, do you think your systems are working as the way it is expected to? And you have all things in place to do it. They're like, yep, 100%. And then I tell them, okay, break things regularly to see if your theory holds. I mean, this isn't in line with the Netflix chaos theory or Amazon's well-architected game day exercise, as they call it. Try doing that, right? To create a muscle memory concept or to see even if it works. You say that you can resolve your incident within, say 5 minutes, right? Okay, break a system, see if you guys can fix it in 5 minutes. Don't do it during the peak hours, the productive hours. Do it sometime to see if you guys can fix it. If they can't, you're just drinking the Kool-Aid and it's going to happen sooner or later.
I absolutely agree. How often you get a chance to practice it, that muscle memory you get from purposely breaking things and having to go in and fix them,
absolutely,
is going to build confidence for everyone and build a better process. And yeah,
that's one thing we agree. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Andy. This has been a really great conversation, and I will try and get you back for a second conversation about this because there's so much more to talk about. Hope you enjoy coming on the show.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Let me know anytime.
And thank you everyone else for tuning in to Slight Reliability, and I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you all next time.